Hello, fifth graders. We are on chapter 3 of Molly Moon's incredible book of hypnotism. So far, Molly is having a very hard day, and she has a very hard life at the Hardwick orphanage. So let's see what happens to her in chapter 3. Molly blasted her way through the school woods, the wet, ferny undergrowth slapping at her legs. She picked up a stick and thrashed the plants. The first hairy fern she came to was Miss Adderstone. Shrap! The stick zipped through the air and cut off her head. Old cow, Molly muttered. A dark green creeper was Edna. Shwip! Filthy old bag. She came to the base of a large yew tree. Poisonous red berries were rotting on the ground around it, and a huge yellow fungus was growing revoltingly on its trunk. Ah, Mrs. Toadley! Thwack, thwack! Molly felt a little better once she had sliced Mrs. Toadley into smelly bits. Notorious yourself, she said. So you guys know she's not really hurting the people. She's pretending the plants are people and whacking them. Sitting down on a tree stump, Molly kicked at a nettle. Take that, Rocky, she said. The nettle bounced back and stung her ankle. As Molly found a dock leaf, she rubbed it on the nettle sting. She thought that maybe Rocky had been right, a bit. But she still felt cross with him. After all, she never nagged him. Sometimes, if he was singing one of his songs, she had to shake him to get his attention. She didn't expect him to change his habits. Molly had thought Rocky liked him exactly as she was. So it was a big shock to discover that he disliked even a part of her. A bigger shock to see him side with the others. She wondered how often he'd been resentful of her without saying anything. He'd been wandering off a lot lately. Had he been avoiding her? Molly's mind burned. What was it he had said? That she never tried at anything? But she acted out ads with him brilliantly. She tried at those. Maybe she should find something else to be good at. That would show him. Molly strode on through the woods, feeling very sorry for herself. The trees cleared, and she stood in the wind on a bare hillside, looking down at the small town of Briarsville. There was the school, and past it the high street, the town hall, and the houses. Everything glistened from the afternoon rain. Cars that looked the size of guinea pigs beetled through its snaking streets. Molly wished that one of these cars were coming to pick her up, to drive her home to a cozy house. She thought about how lucky children who had parents were. However bad their day, they always had a friendly home to return to. Molly diverted her thoughts to the giant billboard that stood on the edge of town, displaying a different advertisement each month. Today, the message beaming into everyone's lives was, be cool, drink Cube. Q-U-B-E, Cube. The picture on the huge board was of a man on a beach, wearing sunglasses, drinking a can of Cube. The famous Cube can flashed its gold and orange stripes, as if Cube, not the sun, lit up the world. Molly liked the way it was hot-looking, and yet had a cool drink inside. Beautiful beach people crowded adoringly around the man who was drinking. They all had wonderful white teeth, but the whitest teeth of all belonged to the guy with the can of Cube. Molly loved Cube ads. She felt she'd practically walked on the white sandy beach where this one was set and knew the glamorous people who played there. She knew they were actors and that the scene was fabricated, but she also trusted that this world of theirs existed. One day, she'd escape from the misery of Hardwick House to begin a new life. A fun-filled life, like the lives of the people in her favorite ads. But it would be real. Molly had tasted Cube once, when Mrs. Trinkleberry had brought in a few cans of it, but the cans had been shared, and so she'd had only a few mouthfuls. With its minty, fruity taste, it certainly was different. As Molly walked down into town, she thought how great it would be if simply drinking one can of Cube could make a person popular. She'd love to be popular, like the glossy people on the poster. How Molly wished she was rich and beautiful, too. As it was, she was poor, weird-looking, and unpopular, a nobody. Down the hill Molly walked, toward the town library. She was very fond of the old, disorganized library. It was peaceful, and its thick photographic books gave her faraway places to dream about. Both Rocky and Molly loved it there. The librarian was always too busy reading or sorting books to bother them. In fact, it was the one place where Molly wasn't the butt of a telling off, and she could relax in her secret place. She climbed the granite steps and passed the stone lions at the top, going into the foyer. The sweet smell of the wooden floor polish made her instantly feel 10 times calmer. She wiped her feet and padded over to the library bulletin board, where there were messages from the outside world. This week, there was somebody trying to sell a waterbed, and someone else trying to find homes for kittens. There were notices about yoga courses, tango lessons, cooking classes, and sponsored walks. The biggest notice of all was for the Briarsville Children's Talent Competition the following weekend. This reminded her of Rocky, since he was entering with one of the songs he'd written. Molly hoped he'd win, but then, remembering that she was still cross with him, she immediately stopped her hoping. Quietly, she opened the door of the library. The librarian was sitting at her desk reading a book. She glanced up at Molly and smiled. "Ah, hello," she said, her kind blue eyes twinkling through her glasses. "When I saw your school jacket through the doors, I thought it was your friend. He's been in here a lot lately. It's nice to see you again." Molly smiled back. "Thanks," she said. The librarian's friendliness made her feel funny. Molly wasn't used to grown-ups being kind to her. Awkwardly, she turned away from the woman's gaze and started to read the pamphlets that were stacked in front of the newspaper table. So it was the library where Rocky had been secretly slopping off to. Molly wondered again if it was because he was trying to avoid her. Then she decided to quit worrying and walk toward the row of bookshelves. She passed along the tall aisles of books, A to C, D to F. The shelves were crammed with books, often too deep. Some books, Molly thought, hadn't been looked at for decades. She passed the G to I books, then the J to L's, M to P's, Q to S, T to W, and X to Z, Molly's favorite place. The X to Z section was all the way at the far end of the library, where the room narrowed, and there was space for only a short shelf. In between the shelf and the wall was a snug place, warmed by an underfloor pipe and lit by its own light bulb. The carpet was less worn out, so hardly anyone ever went there, because there weren't many authors or subjects that started with X, Y, or Z. Occasionally, people would come to that aisle for zoology, or books by an author whose name began with Z, but not very often. Molly took off her jacket and lay down, her head by Y and her feet by Z. The floor was warm, and the distant, rhythmical thudding of the building's boiler, along with the librarian's soothing voice on the phone, helped Molly to breathe peacefully. And soon she was lying on the floor, imagining herself floating in space again, and then she drifted off. A rumpus woke her up. Someone, a man with an American accent, was in a terrible temper, and his gruff voice was getting louder and louder by the second. "I cannot believe this," the speaker bellowed. "I mean, this is unbelievable. I made a deal with you a few days ago on the phone. I wired you the money for the book. Then I fly over from Chicago to get it. 4,000 miles I've come, and you, meanwhile, you go and lose it. I mean, what kind of badly run institution is this?" This was a strange sensation for Molly. Someone else was getting a telling off. The librarian's wren-like voice piped up nervously. "I'm sorry, Professor Nachman. I really can't think what could have happened to it. I saw the book with my own eyes last week. I can only assume it's been taken out by someone. Although it's always been in the restricted section, so that shouldn't have... Oh dear, let me look at the files." Molly peeped through the shelves to see who was making this fuss. At the main desk, the librarian was frantically flicking through a box file, staring beseechingly at the cards, as if begging one of them to explain where the missing book had gone. Molly knew what she felt like. "It's by Logan, you said?" she asked in a worried voice. "Logan," the cross voice corrected her. "And the title begins with H." Molly got onto her knees to peer through a higher shelf to see what this man looked like. There was a barrel-like stomach in a Hawaiian shirt with palm trees and pineapples on it. Molly moved up a level. The shirt was short-sleeved and on his hairy arm the man wore an expensive-looking gold watch. His hands were small and fat, while his fingernails were disgustingly long. He strummed the desk impatiently. Molly moved up one more shelf. Her nose was upturned, and his face was round with a double chin. His black, greasy hair started halfway back across his head and hung down to his shoulders. His beard was a small, sharp black triangle just under his bottom lip, and his mustache was clipped and oiled. His eyes were bulbous, and his face was sunburned. In all, he looked like a very ugly sea lion, and Molly thought, very unlike how she imagined a professor should look. "So," he asked belligerently, "have you found it yet?" Well, no. I'm terribly sorry, Professor Nachman. It seems that it hasn't been let out." "Oh, my goodness. Oh, this is really very embarrassing." The librarian started to scrabble around in her drawer. "Professor Nachman, perhaps for now you ought to take your check back." "I don't want to take my check back," boomed the ugly man. "What sort of lousy librarian are you, losing books?" He stormed over to the G to I aisle. "Some idiot probably put it in the wrong place." The man waddled through the aisles, huffing and sweating. Now he was just on the other side of her bookshelf, so close that Molly could have touched him. He smelled of old hamburger and tobacco. Around his fat neck on a gold chain hung a scorpion medallion. The scorpion had a diamond for an eye, which caught the light and winked at Molly. The professor's pudgy, taloned finger ran menacingly along the top of the T to W books. "Okay," he suddenly announced. "Okay, it's obviously not here. So what we're going to do is this. You," he said, marching back to the librarian's desk, pointing aggressively so that his fingernail almost poked her between the eyes. "You are going to check with your colleagues and find out what happened to my book. As soon as you know, you'll call me." He pulled out a snakeskin wallet from his back pocket and out of that a business card. "I'm staying at the Briarsville Hotel. You will telephone me and keep me updated, and you will get the book back as a matter of priority. I need this book for very important scientific research. My museum will be horrified to hear how it's been mislaid. Have I made myself clear?" "Yes, Professor." The professor then picked up a sheepskin coat and grunted angrily, left the library. The librarian bit her lip and then started adjusting the pins in her bun. Molly sat on the floor. In front of her, a big Y denoted the beginning of the Y shelves. Why? Why was that ugly man so keen to get that book? It must be a very interesting book. More interesting, Molly supposed, than yachting or yodeling or hypnotism. Hypnotism? Molly looked at the book in front of her. Its cover had been ripped, so the first letter of the title had been removed. In a blinding flash, Molly realized that the missing letter had been an H. Could this be the missing book? Quickly, she pulled the heavy, leather-bound book from the shelf, and, checking furtively that no one else was watching, she opened the cover. There, in old-fashioned type, were the words, "Hypnotism, an ancient art explained by Dr. H. Logan, published by Arkwright & Sons, 1908. And this is what it looked like. Molly didn't need to look any further. She quietly shut the book, wrapped it in her jacket, and left the library too. And that was the beginning of the change in Molly Moon's luck. Dun, dun, dun. All right, tomorrow we'll read chapter 4. See you later.